right, so this talk is going to be mostly tutorial, so there would be almost nothing from my research. Maybe at the end, if I have some time, and there would be a few things that probably you already heard from Johan this morning, maybe put with a different perspective, where the idea is to draw some connection, I would say, between diffusion model or like I would say transportation that are used for sampling and optimal transport, which is like I would say something very old in mathematics, and there is a recent renewal thanks to a lot of problems that you can find in machine learning that can be analyzed using optimal transport. And among other things, one of the question I would ask, maybe not answer fully, is whether you want or not to be a gradient, which is the subtitle of this talk. Because spoiler, optimal transportation is driven by gradient field. Okay, so one of the characteristics of optimal transport. Maybe to start, if you want a bit of coding of Python, PyTorch, you can go to this web page. So if you Google OT4ML, probably you'll find the GitHub page. I can show you. So this is the web page. So there is much more than one I will cover. So there is a lot of things on optimal transport. There is one super impressive notebook on diffusion model, which I'm just going to show you, and one on gradient flows, which is going to be also one of the topic of the course. So if you are okay to use Google Colab, and you can just go to Colab, you can even do it live if you don't want to hear my talk, and run the code. So this is an example. So I'm going to spoil the talk. Don't do this. It's not a good idea to give the answers right away. It's basically trying to sample from 3 Dirac. So the target distribution is just 3 Dirac. And we'll start by a Gaussian in the middle. So here is just samples. And this is what you would get with diffusion model. So I'm going to explain it. So you see the trajectories. And you can run the code. I mean, it works. And this is what you get with optimal transport, which gives you straight trajectories. So one of the goals of the talk is to see a bit the difference between the two. Is it good or bad? I mean, this is like open to debate, but I'm going to explain a bit of this. And on this example, I mean, one of the questions that you could ask is whether the two methods are actually the same. So the trajectory are very different, but the question is, if you start by a point here, are you going to end up on this Dirac or this one and this one? And even on this example, it's not so obvious to see the difference between optimal transport and diffusion model. So I'm going to re-ask the question later on, but this is a notebook you can use really numerically on a very simple problem, but not trivial. 2 Dirac would be too trivial because the two would be the same, but 3 Dirac, actually, you can show by inspecting the plots that diffusion model and optimal transport are not exactly the same, which is kind of to be expected, but not so trivial. Okay, let's go back to the talk. Sorry for this long introduction. So I'm going to make it short, but most of the state-of-the-art method for sampling vectorial data, so images or audio, for instance, are based on transportation methods that are going to sample from a reference measure, typically a Gaussian, then integrate some ODE, a flow, and that end up, hopefully, if you did your computation correctly, to the targeted distribution. So usually people would start by Gaussian, which is a paradigm for diffusion model. But with flow matching and method like this, you can actually start by any reference measure, possibly something very complicated, and build interpolation between two arbitrary measures. And obviously, if you switch to Gaussian latent space to a much more complicated distribution, it makes sense that the trajectory are going to be very complicated. Okay, so understanding a bit the geometry of this problem, what are these trajectory, what are the behavior, I would say, of this sampler, I would say is mostly open. I mean, it's a lot of interesting mathematical questions, which I'm not going to address today. I mean, the goal today is to expose a bit the framework. I will ask more questions and give answers. But more generally, the idea is to try to describe the evolution in time. So T would be like an abstract time variable of a family of probability distribution. The first example that I already gave is sampling. I would speak a bit about other applications. I would mostly spend some time on optimization. Typically, if you optimize a neural network and you parameterize the weight of your network as points, so each neuron is going to be a point, or more generally, a probability distribution over the weight of the network. When you do the optimization, you're going to see an evolution of a probability distribution. So actually, you can use the same equation, the same, I would say, techniques, but not to view here the problem as evolving during the sampling time, but here evolving during the optimization time. We're going to use the same type of tools. I would not really speak about this, but there would be several talks during the week about this question, which is modeling transformer with lot of tokens. So it's one of the key aspects of transformers is you can, at least at test time, use them with prompts that are very, very long. It makes sense to treat the transformers as an operator operating over probability distribution of tokens. And it turns out that you can use almost the same equation and the same type of PD techniques. And another application that I work actively, but I would not have time to speak about it, is genomics application, which is also the same time of tools. This time to model the evolution in time of population of cells, like during early development time, or during like a treatment, a cancer treatment. So if you're interested in this last type of application, we can speak during the break. We'd be very happy to speak about it. Okay, so what is the key equation? I would say the master equation of the problem is the equation that translates, I would say, the two languages to describe it. The first one would be the Eulerian, where for each position you have access to the density, the number of particles that are at a given point in space. And at the other end of the spectrum, the Lagrangian, where now you use the dynamics as integrating an ODE. Okay, each particle evolves to an ODE, which is driven by a vector field. Okay, and the connection between the two is this equation, the continuity equation, where you say that the divergence of alpha, the density, times the vector field, plus the derivative in time of alpha is equal to 0. It's a very simple equation in the sense that if you fix alpha, it's linear in V, and if you fix V, it's linear in alpha, but the key difficulty is that there is a bilinear coupling between alpha and V, and this is where all the difficulty or also a lot of interesting phenomena appears. Okay, so basically most of the talk would be revolving on about the question of trying to solve this equation to have like good properties, typically for sampling or optimization. Okay, and what is the transport map? So capital T, not necessarily the optimal transport map. It's just the map that you obtain by integrating the vector field. So you start at x0, and then you transport in time up to a finite position, and you call capital T the mapping, for instance, from time t0 to time 1. And if you have a random vector at time 0, you apply the transportation, then you have T of this x0 random vector, which gives you x1, which by definition has the distribution alpha 1. Okay, so this is really a canonical way to link together two probability distribution. Usually transportation in the language of probability distribution is called push forward. You push forward your initial measure into your target measure. Now, of course, the good question is what capital T should you use, or equivalently, what vector field V should you use? Okay. So I would start basically by recalling what probably Johan spoke to you about, which is the equation of flow matching, and see from there how you can derive the equation of optimal transport. So what is kind of obvious is if you give me a vector field V, at least if it's Lipschitz, you can integrate in time. So if you start from the right-hand side, given a vector field V, a Lagrangian representation, there is a unique Eulerian representation because you just integrate in time the vector field. But the other way around is not a many-to-one mapping. If you observe Eulerian representation, there is many compatible vector field V, okay, simply because the divergence has a huge kernel. For instance, if you observe an isotropic Gaussian that don't move, well, you can say V is 0, it doesn't move. But of course, if you rotate your isotropic Gaussian, it still stays an isotropic Gaussian. So for instance, any rotation is a transportation that would leave also the Gaussian invariant. So the question is, I mean, how do you solve this inverse problem? If you give me a Eulerian representation, what are the admissible V and how to single out a favorable, I would say, vector V? And I would say the simplest route is to regularize in some sense this inverse problem by using just L2 norm. So you're just going to pick the vector V with the minimum effort, the minimum L2 norm. Here there is a bit of a trick, is of course, since you are transporting probability distribution, if there is no particle, there is no reason to penalize. So in some sense, the canonical way or the intrinsic way to speak about L2 norm for vector field is to integrate the L2 norm of the vector field V multiplied by the mass. Okay, and this idea that seems, somehow very, very natural. If you think a bit about the problem, you'd probably come up with this type of regularizer. In fact, it's not so old. It's often credited to Felix Otto. When you do this, you can say you do autocalculus. You look very smart, but it's really like a field that has started a lot with Otto view on the Riemannian geometry of optimal transport. But it turns out that 10 years before, in the PhD thesis of John Lafferty, there was exactly the same idea. And it's really crystal clear. It's explained exactly in his word. And he calls it the density manifold. So viewing the space of probability distribution as a manifold equipped with this norm, in some sense, on the tangent space, it's what Lafferty, which is quite famous in machine learning. So after doing pure math, he switched to machine learning, which is kind of interesting. I think it could be credited to John Lafferty. Okay, so what do you do with this? You're just going to do a least square inversion, a ridge regression. Among all possible compatible vector field V, you pick the one with minimum L2 norm. So it's a linear problem under linear, it's a quadratic problem under linear constraints. So you can introduce a Lagrange multiplier, a pressure field psi, and from the first order condition, you see that being a least square solution, so being a least F4 solution is exactly equivalent to being a gradient field. Okay, so the subtitle of my talk, do you want or not to be a gradient field, is equivalent to say, do you want or not to be a least square solution? It's if and only if. So if you're a gradient field, okay, then you just plug this inside the continuity equation, and you see that what you need to solve is a Laplacian. You have the divergence of the gradient. You need to solve the inverse of a weighted Laplacian. So as a mathematician, you can study it. It's well posed. You can analyze it. There's no problem. But of course, from a practical perspective, it's impossible to solve a Laplacian. Even in 3D, it's hard, but in high dimension, it's totally inaccessible. So it's something that's interesting from a mathematical perspective, but it's not something you can do like this without other information. Okay, because it would require you to discretize the space maybe, or use finite elements, which is out of the question. So the key idea, or many key ideas that would be appearing after, is how to somehow leverage more structure, more information. And here I will study two structures: the flow matching, that was introduced by Eric, among others, and optimal transport, which was introduced before Eric. But it's a bit like having two different structures, where then the problem looks simpler. So for flow matching, it's much simpler. The equation is much simpler because you use a specific interpolant that has a very nice structure. For optimal transport, or you could argue it's much more difficult, but still you have algorithm. Okay, the complexity of optimal transport is like cubic in the number of particles. So of course, with a lot of particles, it's still hard, but at least there are polynomial time algorithms to do the computation. So it's something you can do on a computer, and people do on a computer, solve optimal transport. Okay, so flow matching first, which is kind of a generalization, I would say, of diffusion model. Here the idea is you are going to prescribe the Eulerian interpolation. You are going to give a formula for the interpolant alpha of t. And the simplest way to do this is just to do somehow a convolution, in some sense, of the density. How do you do a convolution at the level of particles? It's quite simple. You pick a random particle here. So you choose randomly here a particle, choose another one randomly here, and you just link the two by linear interpolation. So in terms of random vector, it means the random vector xt that interpolate between the two is just the linear interpolation between the two random vectors. Okay, and doing linear interpolation at the level of random vector, in terms of density, is just doing a convolution. Okay, so this is why typically, even if you start with two very sharp density, in the middle you observe something that is very blurry because it's going to be the convolution of the two densities. So it's very simple but very smart because you really work at the level of particles. Okay. So this is why you're typically going to observe an interpolation. The particle they would move as you would expect. Okay. But why it is so useful? It's useful because of this property that was shown by Eric in his paper, which I think is both beautiful, simple, not hard to prove, but very deep. So the consequences of this property are actually very profound. So it's a very, very nice theorem, I would say, which says that I've already said that if you prescribe Eulerian evolution, you have an infinite number of possible vector fields that are compatible. This theorem will single out one possible V. It's not necessarily, it's not the only one, but it's one that has a nice property because it's quite easy to compute. What is it? I'm going to show you on this picture here. Let's pick a point X. What is the vector field you can use or you should use? You just pick any possible trajectory that passes through these points. So you took every possible X and Y whose linear interpolation passed through the point. It gives you a candidate vector, green vector, which is just the difference between the 2 points. And then you're just going to average all possible green vector. So it means that basically this vector field V is just the conditional expectation of the difference between the starting point and the end point, conditioned to the constraint that the linear interpolation is equal to X. So if you want, in terms of integral, it's just the ratio of two integrals. And the key property is that this vector field V satisfies the continuity equation. It's not the only one, but it's one that has a very simple structure. Okay, so why is it nice? Because the conditional expectation is itself the solution of a least square. Okay, so before I've told you we are going to solve a least square, it's very complicated. Here we see that this vector field is a conditional expectation, so it also solves a least square, so it's the best regressor possible, because the conditional expectation is just the best possible regressor of any possible difference. But here this least square is unconstrained. You don't have anymore this nasty PD. It's just an unconstrained least square, which you can solve basically by SGD. Okay, so you can use stochastic gradient descent to compute by minimization this vector field V. Another way to look at this is that this vector field V, this optimal regressor, is like a denoiser that makes you pass from x0 to x1. Okay, so there's many interpretations, but it's very powerful because finding V is nothing more than solving an unconstrained least square, which you can do, for instance, by parametrizing your vector field V to be typically a neural network. Okay, it's not going to be a talk on neural networks. So one key question, is why neural networks are very efficient at solving this problem at parametrizing the set of vector field you would like to use in practice. And this is absolutely not covered by this talk. So I think this is the key ingredient, the key reason why flow matching type and diffusion model are successful is because this vector field V has this simple expression. Now, I've said it's a generalization of diffusion model because in the case where the first distribution, the red one, is a Gaussian, so in this case, you're going to convolve your target distribution with the Gaussian. So convolving with the Gaussian is nothing more than solving the heat equation. Okay, so here the interpolation is going to be just a heat equation from the blue to the Gaussian. In this case, you can use what is called 3D formula, which is a nice way to rewrite this vector field V, not only as a conditional expectation, which is not really a closed form, but just as the gradient of the log of the interpolant. Okay, so once again, if you start by your isotropic Gaussian, then in fact, this vector field V up to a rescaling is just the score, the gradient of the log. So you could say it's like a closed form if you want, but of course, I mean, in practice, the question is how do you estimate the gradient of the log? So you're going to use this formula. But here you see the connection that in this case, so really I insist when alpha 0 is isotropic Gaussian, the vector field V is the gradient, So in this case, the flow matching is actually a least effort principle in some sense. It's solving the autocalculus or what I presented in the previous slide. In general, if you don't start by isotropic Gaussian, you don't expect this vector field V, this conditional expectation, to be a gradient. I don't know if Eric has an opinion about this. My intuition is it's almost a gradient if and only if you start by isotropic Gaussian, but I don't have a proof of this. So anyone interested to study this totally useless but fun question is welcome to talk to me. So this formula is specific to interpolating from a Gaussian, but for some, in some problem, you might want to start by something that is not a Gaussian. Typically, if you have a good guess that is closer to the cats than an isotropic Gaussian, maybe another cat, then maybe it's a better idea. And this proposition would not be true. All right. Now switch to the second layer of the talk, which is optimal transport. It's not going to be a talk on optimal transport. So this is going a one slide definition of optimal transport, an intuitive definition in the sense of Gaspard Monge. So, more than 200 years ago, which is often called the optimal matching problem. In the discrete case, it's quite simple to understand. So here I assume my two measures are actually discrete and with the same number of Dirac, so uniform on two sets of points with the same number of points. In this setting, the optimal transport T is just the one that minimizes the sum of travel distance to the power 2 in the modern language. In fact, Monge, quite interestingly, did the problem without the power 2. And in this case, the problem is much more difficult to analyze mathematically. If you put the power 2, and I would explain the slide just after, there is a very rich structure and the problem becomes much simpler. Okay? So the permutation that minimizes this is called the optimal transport. Then you can generalize to arbitrary number of points or possibly to arbitrary distribution by taking among all possible ways to push forward alpha 0 to alpha 1, same thing, the one that minimizes the square Euclidean distance. Okay? It's not absolutely trivial when this problem has a solution. For instance, if you start by a discrete distribution and alpha 1 is continuous, there is no solution. Okay, so you need some conditions. So in general, you don't expect Monge solution to always exist if you start from an arbitrary density. But there is a celebrated theorem by Jan Brognier, and I would come back to this, that says that at least if you start by a measure with density, it always has a solution, it's always unique. So it's a very rich mathematical theory. And another way to also define this, well, a way to define this is also just to say that this is the limit of this when the number of points tends to infinity. So if you master this problem, you can just pass to the limit. Another way is to use what is called Kantorovich relaxation, which I'm not going to explain if you're interested. I mean, it's of course very rich. And he got the Nobel Prize in economy for this. It's not only a small detail, it's also something that is very profound and used a lot for economic modeling, where you have like consumer and producer and you want to link them together. So it's also this is also the birth of like modern mathematical economics, of linear programming. So it's really a problem that is linked to a lot of mathematical evolution, I would say, in the last century. Okay, but stick to this definition, which is often called Monge problem, or the static definition of optimal transport, where you jump from time 0 to time 1. Okay, you see here the difference with that I explained before. Before I was saying that T is like integrating a vector field V. Here there is no vector field. In the static formulation, I jump immediately from time 0 to time 1. But of course, wait for it. I'm going to come back to the dynamics. So let's go back first to what I've told you before, to diffusion model. So here I prescribe alpha of T. I prescribe the Eulerian interpolation, and I say that I'm looking for the vector field V, which solves the ridge regression. So at least if I start by a Gaussian, this is exactly the diffusion model. It's exactly equivalent to flow matching. So to switch from these two optimal transports, in fact, the only thing that you need to do, of course it's a very big move, is to also optimize over alpha. Instead of prescribing the value of alpha, you would say, okay, let's look also for the alpha that is the best possible. In the language of geometry, it would be called a geodesic. Okay, instead of prescribing this interpolation, you let here the interpolation, so this one, to be the optimal one to minimize the total traveled distance, so really the geodesics. So you see here, it's exactly the same energy, but you also optimize over alpha. So it's apparently much more difficult, and a priori non-convex, because here you get the product of alpha and V, so a priori it's non-convex. But there is a hidden convexity behind it, but a priori it's non-convex. So in some sense, this has a smaller energy. This is better in the sense of the total traveled distance. And you can see that in some sense, interpolation is much crisper. It keeps the singularity, and it produces no blurring. Just a remark that it leads to very different type of interpolation. So now you can say, okay, what is the connection with the static formulation I've told you about before? And the connection is actually, it's equal. The least possible geodesic energy is exactly equal to the Wasserstein, I mean, it's called the Wasserstein distance, I should have said this before, but to the cost of the Monge transportation. This is often, I mean, this is called the Benamou-Brognier formula, because Jean-David Benamou and Jan Brognier proved it. This is the formula that says that the static formulation, moving from time t0 to time 1, give you a cost that is equal to the minimal possible cost among all possible V and all possible alpha. And when you prove the theorem, and the proof is actually beautiful, in fact, not only you prove the theorem, but you have actually the formula that links the two together, which is that in fact, the interpolation alpha t is nothing more than connecting along the capital T linearly the point. So this is this figure. So it looks similar, but it's very different because here it's a random interconnection. You pick a point here randomly, you pick a point here randomly, and then you do straight line. With optimal transport or with Benamou-Brognier formula, the interpolation, the dynamic interpolation is obtained by taking x, going to T of x in a deterministic way, and then linking in a one-to-one fashion the connection. Okay. In particular, thanks to this theorem, you see that points are going to travel in straight line. Okay, which is not the case here. Here it looks like points traveling in straight line, but it's not the case because here each red point is split into a lot of points. So if you analyze the trajectory integrating along the vector field V, you see that points are not going to move in straight line. which was exactly, if you remember, my Jupyter notebook that you can run, where you saw that optimal transport, they move in straight line, whether with this diffusion model, you get very weird trajectories, which with one reason, so I'm not going to speak too much on this because I think there is no current really stable theory that says that if you were able to actually estimate this capital T, this would be much better because it's much simpler to integrate an OD in straight line that along very curved trajectory. In some sense, I mean, you can just jump with a very large time step, whether with a diffusion model, if you get very curvy trajectory, you need small time step. Okay, and this is important because in practice, of course, what costs a lot in sampling is the fact that you need to discretize your OD. Okay, the good news with diffusion model with respect that was done before, like GANs or normalizing flow, is that it's much easier to train. It's very easy to train. But the bad news is at test time, when you want to deploy your model, it costs a lot because you need to integrate an OD. Whether if you were able to have access to the optimal transport solution, you would be the king of the whatever, because you could like use very large step size. Of course, there is no free lunch. There is like a conservation of problems because estimating optimal transport is a priori hard. So it's not clear what you gain from here. But here is just to discuss a bit the difference in geometry. And I would just want to insist once more that although the problem looks very similar, the interpolation would be different. Okay, so let's, if you have questions, feel free to ask me. Yeah. Yes, I think you could generalize this a bit more, like Brunet theorem, you can have weaker condition, but typically, if you want to be on the safe side, you need to ask the starting density, the starting measure to have a density. Yes. Yes. The difficulty, if you don't have enough points in the starting measure, you cannot populate the target measure. So intuitively, you need a support that is larger from the start to the end. But even proving this, I mean, it's a good exercise. If you start with a measure that has a larger support than the target, is there always a transport map? The answer is yes, but the proof is non-trivial. Okay, so let's move to the third layer, which is arguably to be a bit more complicated, but stay with me. I think it's probably the most interesting use of optimal transport, the one that has created many follow-up work in mathematics, in PDE, and more, I would say, in machine learning, which is the use of optimal transport, not only to interpolate, but to optimize the function. And in some sense, sampling, and I will come back to this, is also some form of optimization. You can view sampling as a special case of optimization over the space of measure. But this is like a general question. I have a function f that gives a score to any set of points, and I want to minimize it. So in some sense, you want to initialize with some densities, and you would like to have a set of densities that progressively minimize the function itself. Okay? How do you do it? It's non-trivial because it's an infinite dimensional space, a space of probability distribution, and it's not clear it really has the Euclidean geometry. You could say it's like L2 over the density, but it doesn't really make sense. And the good way to think about the problem is to somehow first describe an algorithm, I would say a discrete Euler method, that would progressively jump from one measure to another one, still staying close from the previous iterate, but at the same time minimizing the function, which is exactly the intuition between this numerical scheme that is often called the GKO scheme because it was introduced by Jordan, Kinderlehrer, and Otto, so the same Otto as before, which is to say you start from alpha t, and then you move to alpha of t plus tau by minimizing f, but at the same time stay close to the previous one according to the Wasserstein distance. Okay, and in some sense, this is like a generalization of the classical, I would say, Euler method, because if you impose that the measures that you consider are only made of a single Dirac, then the Wasserstein distance is just the Euclidean distance. And this is exactly the definition of the implicit Euler method. So if you take tau goes to 0 in the implicit Euler method, you're just going to follow minus the gradient of h. So this is like on the left side, if you take measure with a single Dirac, when you like tau goes to 0, you're just going to do basically the gradient flow of the function. But here it's much more interesting because when tau goes to 0, you will have a continuous evolution of your measure. So if you have heard correctly what I've said from the start, the good things to check that you have understood, this is something that you can describe with the continuity equation. Okay, so of course here there is some hypothesis. I'm just like making as if everything was rigorous, but under some like reasonable hypothesis, this evolution alpha t would be described by I would say Lagrangian vector field V that would satisfy this continuity equation. So exactly as the same question that was asked by Eric and by others, like finding a vector field V, here you can ask your question, what could be a vector field V? It looks very complicated. The good news is there is a very simple candidate for the vector field V, which is called the Wasserstein gradient. So I'm sorry, the formula looks a bit complicated, but I want to parse it for you because I think it's very important. So this is the definition of the Wasserstein gradient. So vector field V would be minus the Wasserstein gradient of F. How do you compute it? In fact, you need to differentiate twice in some sense. The first thing you need to do is to take your function F and do, I would say, a classical Taylor expansion. So you take alpha, you take a little displacement, we say vertical displacement, so you add a little bit of beta, okay? And then you do a first order expansion, and you say that it would be f of alpha plus tau times a linear term with respect to your displacement. So what is a linear term? It's just the integral between a function and beta, okay? At first order, this little modification, like vertical displacement of mass, would be encoded by a continuous function, which is often called, I would say, the first variation, or the L2 derivative in some sense. I call it delta F. I don't think there is a general agreement on the notation for this object. This object, be very careful, it's a function. Okay, we are in infinite dimension. The gradient, if you want, the classical gradient would be a function itself, depending on your measure. So this is the first thing you need to do. And then you need to compute the classical gradient of this function. Okay, so in particular, this vector field V, this Wasserstein gradient, is a classical gradient field, okay, which is the gradient, so the horizontal gradient of the vertical derivative. Okay, so it's good because it's very simple, it's beautiful, it's a closed form formula. So I like it a lot. And you can give some example to see what's happening. The first example would be just take a function which is just independent contribution of each particle, like a linear function of the measure. In this case, what is the classical derivative of a linear function is just h itself, it's a constant. So the Wasserstein gradient of a linear function is just the gradient of h, which is exactly this formula. So you recover classical gradient flow in the case where the function you consider treat particles independently. So of course, interesting problems or phenomena appears when you start to couple your particle. I would say the simplest way or the most natural way to couple them is to consider that f of alpha is some distance to a target. And this is exactly what you want to do when you do sampling. You want to sample from a Gaussian, and then you want your Gaussian to be as close as possible to your target. Okay? So let's take a simple way to measure a distance, which is the relative entropy. You do the computation. What is the classical derivative of Kullback? So it could be an exercise, but we don't have time. So it's just the derivative of x log x. So it's just going to be log x. Okay? So the delta f of Kullback-Leibler is just the log of the ratio. Okay? And then you take the gradient of the log. And if you plug into the continuity equation, you get basically Fokker-Planck equation, which is nothing more than Langevin. Okay, so Langevin method is just the Wasserstein gradient flow of the relative entropy. And of course, if you change the relative entropy, then you can get all a zoo of Langevin type algorithm, which corresponds to minimizing the Wasserstein distance. So this is in this sense that I say that many methods in sampling that actually correspond to minimizing a discrepancy. This is well understood. I mean, this is non-trivial, but I mean, in this case, it's trivial because it's just the heat equation. Actually, it's why these three guys, they become famous, because they basically, their paper is focused on this equation. They even take like beta equal 1, so you just get the classical heat equation. So it's really a new way to interpret the heat equation or the diffusion as minimizing the relative entropy, which is very different from Fourier original interpretation, where Fourier view, and many mathematicians after, as the heat equation, the way to minimize, in some sense, the L2 norm of the gradient, but with respect to the classical L2 metric. So here, really, we do something very different. We consider like densities, but equipped with the Wasserstein metric. So of course, if you change both the metric and the function, you could get the same equation. Okay, so same PDE, but different interpretation. And things start to get messy, complicated, and non-trivial when you, for instance, look at more complicated functional, like quadratic functional. So in this case, you get the gradient vector, which would be like, depending on all your neighboring densities, and the PD you get, are typically very complicated to analyze. In particular, understanding when it will converge to the global minimizer is a priori a very tough question. And sometimes it don't. I mean, sometimes it gets blocked in local minimizer. I'm going to give an example of this, a non-trivial example where you can analyze the PD and prove, in some sense, a global convergence. It's the case where you study the dynamics of the training of a very toy model for neural network, which is just two-layer MLP. but I would say that are back in business because in transformers, you get this network all around the place. So in transformers, the MLP you get in transformer are just like 2 layers MLP. So it's still interesting to see that even today, state-of-the-art network, they still rely on this very simple 2-layer MLP. So why is it nice and beautiful? Is because if you write this type of simple model in expansion, so here, just to give you the notation, my input vector, I would call it Z, not to mess up with my X that I used before. So be careful here, the data is called Z. Then you get a first layer of linear transform, then typically a ReLU, and then another layer of linear transform. But if you expand it over the hidden dimension, it's going just to be a sum on the neuron, k is the index of the neuron, of a linear function here, then multiplied by u. Okay, and why is it interesting? Because this representation is invariant by permutation of the hidden representation. Okay, if you permute your neurons, then the function stays the same. So this gives you a hint that the good way to look at the training of 2-layer neural network is to view the network as a collection of particles. We're just going to glue together the hidden neuron with the outer neuron in a pair UV. So let's say this dimension D and dimension D prime is going to be a point in dimension D plus D prime. And then optimizing your neural network is nothing more than having a particle system in dimension D plus D prime that moves, hopefully with global minimizer. Okay, so this is the equation you would get if you do classical gradient flow. Let's say for simplicity of a least square, you look for the network that move Zi, as close as possible to Yi. What does it mean? It means you have a set of particles that moves according to a coupled system of ODE. So a priori, very difficult. I mean, a priori, non-trivial to analyze because you get a lot of particles typically. But the other way you can look at the problem, since it's invariant by permutation, is to model your network by a probability distribution. It's just like a tautology. I'm not saying it's easier. It's just another way to look at the problem that can open new possibilities. So what do? You simply basically replace the sum by an integral. Okay, so alpha is going to be a measure over probability distribution. But of course, if alpha is a discrete probability distribution, then you go back to this. This is just a generalization to a possibly infinite number of neurons. But this equation is still valid in the case where you get a finite number of neurons. Okay, then you get a function f of alpha that is actually quadratic in alpha. So in fact, it's exactly the function I've studied before. So it's a quadratic function of alpha that you want to minimize. And the key idea is doing Wasserstein gradient flow. So this equation is exactly equivalent to this. Okay, so once again, if alpha is a discrete probability measure, these two things are exactly the same. I'm not saying that this is an approximation of this. It's just like the same, just view with a more fancy PDE type notation. But the good news is this is still valid even if you let the number of neurons goes to plus infinity. Where here it's unclear, you get infinite number of ODE, what does it mean? Here there's no problem, it's totally valid. I mean, if you want the one-line idea, is like you have an infinite number of ODE, it just becomes a PDE, which is a nice PDE, or nice, depends, but it's a Wasserstein gradient flow with a quadratic function. So I've told you before, in general, in full generality, this type of equation are horrible to analyze. This is basically the equation of physics. If you get like stars that evolve according to Newtonian potential, they are going to obey this type of PDE, and these are horrible and intractable in general. The good news is for this very specific case of function, equivalently for this very specific case of kernel K, in particular, which has this like linear dependency on part of the variable, you can exploit this and prove a global convergence theorem that was proved in this paper by Linnaeus and Francis a few years ago, which is basically if you initialize, your flow or your optimization with the infinite number of particles with the densities, then these densities can only converge to the global minimizer. Okay, so there is still a catch because they assume it converges. To the best of my knowledge, I don't know about any counterexample to convergence. So I conjecture, in fact, it always converges as gradient flow. If you don't know, but gradient flow always converge. Here, at least on convex function or functions that are not so full. So the conjecture, in fact, it always converge, but they could not prove it in their paper. They say if it converges, it can only converge to a global minimizer. And then they also prove some stability, which says that this theorem that is true for density, in fact, transfer to discrete measure if you get enough Dirac. Okay, so you see the way they did the proof is they they say, okay, this is an equation. Then you can have this equation that works for an infinite number of neurons. Then this gives the PDE. Then they analyze the convergence of the PDE. And then they go back by discretization that says that this theorem still holds for discrete measure. So it's really, I would say, a very nice, not only reasoning, but state of mind where you use PDE as a tool to prove convergence. The key difficulty, of course, is when you discretize, it's non-quantitative. There's no speed of convergence, nothing is known. So you don't know how many neurons you need. Maybe you need, for this theorem to hold, maybe you need, and probably in the worst case, you need a number of neurons that far exceeds the number of particles in the universe. So this is not something that is effective in practice. So the good question is why in practice does it work with not so many neurons? And of course, this is not covered by this theory. I think I'm going to skip the other parts. Just the part on genomics come to me. It's much more application. There is obviously not much mathematics, but it's basically using this to model the dynamics of cells. And the last part, there would be several talks that would be covering this in detail. So you're on the safe side with experts in the room. There is Morgan somewhere. I mean, anyway, you hear several talks. So I'm just going to jump to the conclusion. Don't do this if you are young in the room. Prepare well your slides. So this is my beautiful picture with sampling 3 Diracs. But just to highlight that even on simple case and simple problem, I think nobody really understood more in detail, I would say, the geometry of diffusion model. What is the regularity of the map? How are they stable? When you discretize, what type of errors? And I think this is very exciting. For optimal transport, it's a bit better known, but the bad news in general, I mean, there is little hope in very high dimension to compute optimal transport. So I think there is something to do in the middle, but we don't really understand yet. I'm just putting here the picture of Hugo because Hugo is the one that proved with a 20 page of computation that basically the bijection you get between the two are not the same. So although it looks obvious on the board, doing the mathematical proof is very hard. Spoiler, on Gaussian, they are the same. So you can use Gaussian. You cannot use Gaussian to find counterexample. This is about I've told about the paper of Lenaik, which is just 2 layers. Obviously, understanding what happened when you put more layers is very exciting and very hard. I'm putting here the picture of Raphael, who is my PhD student, that did some, let's say, local analysis, but it's very far from understanding. Even for linear neural network, nobody really understands what's happening during the training of very deep network. So it's still fun to see that we are still facing huge difficulties to understand the training dynamics. And for genomics, I mean, this is Gert with an expert, but come to me if you're interested. Okay, thanks a lot for your attention.